Bible says that God created the universe approximately 6,000 years ago, ex nihilo, out of nothing, in 6 literal 24-hour days. Then, approximately 4,400 years ago, a worldwide flood destroyed the earth, and this devastating year-long flood was responsible for the sediment layers being deposited. The water was going and returning, Genesis chapter 8. And as the mountains rose and the ocean basins sank after the flood, Psalm 104, verse 5, and Genesis 8, verse 1, the waters rushed off the rising mountains into the new ocean basins, and the rapid erosion, though still soft, unprotected sediments formed the topography we see today in places like the Grand Canyon. And the uniformitarian assumption that today's slow erosion rates that take place through solid rock are the same as always been is faulty logic and ignores the catastrophe, like the flood. 2 Peter 3:8 says that the scoffers, 2 Peter 3 verses 3 to 8 says the scoffers are willingly ignorant of the flood. They don't want to admit the flood because the flood definitely forms all those layers out there. It's called hydrologic flood. And let's see how science limits the age of the universe to a few thousand years. I'm going to link it in with biblical teaching, but it's important that your Bible does show you it's not exactly a scientific account, but it is a factual account, and the Bible doesn't show us absolutely everything, but it does give us enough for what we need for our salvation and our faith. What about the evidence from space, for instance? Well, fossil meteorites are very rare in layers other than the top layers of the Earth. This shows that the layers were not exposed for millions of years, as is currently being taught in the school textbooks. Another one, the moon is receding a few inches per year. Billions of years ago, the moon would have been so close that the tides would have been much higher, eroding away the continents. See, we're losing the moon is going away from us. And we extrapolate it backwards, the moon would have been so close, and the tides would have been much higher, and that would have been difficult. Thirdly, among other factors to consider, is that the ancient astronomers from 2,000 years ago recorded that Sirius was a red star. Today it's a white dwarf star. And since today's textbooks in astronomy state that 100,000 years are required for a star to evolve from a red giant to a white dwarf, obviously this view needs to be restudied and changed. And 2,000 years ago it's changed. I mean, for goodness sake, it takes a short time for those things to change. Stars do burn out, and they explode as well. Novas and supernovas. And we can see that the things out there, the galaxies, they should have lost all their spiral shape, so that indicates that the world is less than billions of years old as well. What about the Earth? The evidence from the Earth? Well, topsoil formation rates indicate only a few thousand years of formation. Think of that one. Niagara Falls as well, erosion rate, 4 to 5 feet a year, indicates an age of less than 10,000 years. And don't forget, Noah's flood could have eroded half of the 7-mile long Niagara River gorge in a few hours as the flood waters raced through the soft sediments. Next one, the size of the Mississippi River Delta divided by the rate of the mud is being deposited gives an age of less than 30,000 years. Well, that's way down in billions of years, guys. I mean, the flood in Noah's day could have washed out 80% of the mud in a few hours or a few days. So 4,400 years ago for a flood is a reasonable age for the delta. As well as that, a relatively small amount of sediment is now on the ocean floor. There should be loads more. And that indicates only a few thousand years of accumulation, because as the rivers are going in, they're depositing sediment. Another one, the oceans are getting saltier. I mean, if they were billions of years old, they'd be really, really, really salty by now, and they're not. So, there's plenty of evidence from the Earth. Evidence from biology. When the current population of the Earth, 5.5 billion, can easily be generated from 8 people, survivors, in less than 4,000 years. Think of that. So, folks, what is the evidence from biology? I mean, the current population of the Earth is about 6.3 billion. And if you look at that population, that can easily be generated from 8 people, like survivors of the flood, in less than 4,000 years. No problem. Now, if you think the Earth is billions of years old, well, you're going to seriously have a problem, because there would be too many people to count. You couldn't count them all. So, the world cannot be billions of years old. The population would have been too great. I mean, folks, the present population explosion is the result of improved sanitary conditions at childbirth and afterwards. So in earlier centuries, many more children died before the age of 3. You know that in the Industrial Revolution. I know in Belfast, where I'm from. I was born there, going back to the 1750s, 1800s. A lot of industrialization. People did not have, because of working conditions, they died very young.
Things have improved now because industrializations and things have improved. So, and conditions in factories have improved and so on. So people have increased the lifespan, and particularly. But based on the population changes between 1650 and 1850, when you look at it, statistical analysis, it provides us with the fact that about the year 3300 BC there was only one family. I mean, the human population grows so rapidly that its present size couldn't have been reached in less than 1%, in other words 3,200 years of the minimum time assumed, which is 500,000 years, for man on the basis of radiometric dating. So said Ariel Roth, summary from Some Questions About Geochronology and Origins, volume 13. So, the rate of world population growth is varied greatly throughout history as a result of such things as pestilences, famines, wars, catastrophes, floods. But all of this, when you put all this into the equation, estimates generally focus on 300 million as the population of the earth at the time of Christ. And based on the small-sized families from the time of the flood, 2400 BC, we'll say 4,400 years ago, to the time of Christ, the population by that time would have been about 300 million people. Now, if in contrast the human race had been on earth for about 1 million years, are you listening now? The human race had been on earth for 1 million years, let's say, as the evolutionists say we were, even with a very low growth rate, let's say 0.01% annually, the resulting population by the time of Christ would be 2 by 10 to the power of 43 people. 2 by 10 to the power of 43 is the numeral 2 followed by 43 zeros. In 1,000 solar systems, 9 planets like ours could barely hold that many people packed in solid. For goodness sake. Men are dreaming up theories and then they call it science. I mean, for goodness sake, facts versus theories. In 1862, Thomson said the Earth was 20 million years old. 35 years later, 1897, he doubled it to 40 million. 2 years later, Jolie said it was 90 million. Rayleigh, 1921, said the Earth was over 1 billion years. 11 years later, Hotchkiss moved the figure to 1.6 billion. Holmes, 1947, 3.35 billion. 1956, he raised it to 4.5 billion. Gee, just now the age of the Earth stands at about 5 billion years. Pretty soon someone will raise it again. The age of the Earth is aging rapidly, folks. For goodness sake. That's population statistics now. And from other living things, tree rings, for instance. The giant sequoias of California have no known enemies except man, and only recently did man, with his saws, have the ability to destroy them. Insects do not bother them, nor even forest fires. They live on, century after century. Yet the sequoias are never older than about 4,000 years. Giant redwoods seem to be the original trees that existed in their timber stands. Sequoia gigantea. In their grooves in the Sierra Nevada mountains, never have any dead trees or snags among them, unless man cuts them down. There's no evidence that they ever die. And the University of Arizona has a department that specializes in tree dating. Schulman, in the Dendrochronological Laboratory, discovered a stand of still older trees in the White Mountains of California. These were the bristlecone pines, the oldest living tree, folks. The Pinus longalva. And many scientists have worked with the bristlecone pine seedlings in the native habitat of Arizona. In fact, in the San Francisco mountain region, where they do grow, they have spring and fall rains with a very dry summer in between, and working carefully with the seedlings and giving them the same type of watering and other climatic conditions that they would normally receive. Walter Lammerts found that much of the time the bristlecone pines produce 2 growth rings a year. And that's an important discovery, because it indicates that the sequoias, not the bristlecone pines, are probably the oldest living things on Earth. Well, think of it. With just one generation of the Sequoia gigantea, and the parent trees and their offspring are still alive. There's no record of any other tree or any living thing that's older than any reasonable date given for the Genesis flood. And the giant sequoias, there's no reason why they couldn't have lived for many thousands of years beyond their present lifespan. So, other evidence from biology, I mean, the oldest living coral reef is less than 4,200 years old. The oldest living tree in the world is, as I just said, is 4,300 years old. But you've also got great evidence from civilization. I mean, the Earth is quite young. historical records, for instance. If mankind has been living and working on planet Earth for millions of years, why do we find records of man only dating back to about 2000 to 3500 BC? And these records, when they're found, they reveal the existence of a highly developed civilization. So, ancient man wasn't dumb, he was smart. The early Egyptian records, the earliest historical books, are those of the Egyptians and the Hebrews. Historical dates given to the beginnings of the Egyptian and the Sumerian history are king lists. Now, the earliest records are the Egyptian king list, dating from about the first dynasty in Egypt, to 3200, 3600 BC. But these dates should be lowered. An Egyptologist in 1956, Mr. Hall, he wrote that we think that the first dynasty began not before 3400 and not much later than 3200. Scharf, however, would bring the date down to about 3000 BC. And it must be admitted that his arguments are good, and at any rate it's more probable that the date of the first dynasty is later than 3400 BC. So the problem with the first dynasty dates is that they're based on the king lists of Manetho, an Egyptian priest who lived many centuries later, in 250 BC. That's when Manetho lived, and that's when he produced the king lists. But Manetho's writings have only been preserved in a few inaccurate quotations in other ancient writings. See, there's a problem. The number of years assigned to each king and the length of time covered by the dynasties differ in two copies that they have. So that while the work of Manetho forms the backbone of the chronology, it gives no absolute reliable chronology. So confusion in regard to the Egyptian dating has continued on. And this is the problem now, that they're looking at the Egyptian, they should be looking at the Bible. For instance, in the course of a single century's research, the earliest date in Egyptian history, right, that's Egypt's unification under King Menes, has plummeted from 5876 to 2900 BC. And even that year hasn't been established. So, and I think that a number of Egyptologists think that Manetho's list dealt not with a single dynasty, but with two different ones that reigned simultaneously. They reigned simultaneously in Upper and Lower Egypt, and this reduces the dates. So the dates, the list deal with two simultaneously reigning set of kings, and they're not numerically accurate, and Manetho fabricated names, events, numbers, history. I mean, come on. So, it's highly significant that well-authenticated Egyptian dates only go back to about 1600 BC, according to the experts. I mean, the Egyptians had a centre of the universe attitude about themselves. They coloured or falsified historical reporting in order to make themselves look better. So, and the same with the Sumerians as well were the first people with written records in the region of Greater Babylonia. And their earlier dates present us with the same problems we find with the Egyptians. But the early biblical record, I believe, is a valid history and shouldn't be discounted in any scientific effort to determine the dates. The Bible has consistently been verified by authentic historical archaeological research. The first books of the Bible are written by Moses, 1510 to 1450 BC, and the date of the Exodus would be about 1492 BC. Chronological data in the book of Genesis indicates that creation week occurred about 4000 BC, and the date of the flood was about 2348 BC.